What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be reviewing Marvel Spider-Man 2, and I got a lot to say about this game because initially I was blown away by it and I freaking loved the game, but over time my opinions have really changed about it. I've beaten it twice now, and this review is going to be filled with spoilers, by the way, so be careful about that. If you haven't already beaten the game, I'd advise you get off of this video right now, but I just want to get into like how my feelings about this game have changed and like how I would review it right now compared to what it was like when it first came out. So let me go over the good first. When the game first came out, I was in love with it. I loved the swing, I loved the combat. The story was freaking epic. You got Venom, Kraven, Yuri, Peter and Miles, all these awesome things going on. And as well as the boss fights, you got multiple phases and the enemies are all having like these parry attacks you have to dodge, and the bosses were like all really long and they had health bars just like I asked for in my older videos about this game. And all those things are awesome, but like I was starting to have some issues with this game like as I played it more, especially even by the end of my first playthrough. There was a moment where I just like knew the game was a disappointment. And it's really unfortunate, but that's how I feel about the game now. I feel like it's the worst of the series. I feel like even Miles Morales was better than this, and that's really a shame. I have to explain why now, though. So let me go over this story first. The main thing that drags this story down is the third act, because basically Venom was just not handled well at all. Like, after you play as him, then you kill Kraven, right? And then Venom just like gets sidelined and it becomes a whole symbiote invasion thing. And that's a huge issue because like apparently Tony Todd, the voice actor for Venom, apparently like 90% of his dialogue was cut, which means that Venom's like entire role in this game was just delegated to a few scenes. And, he was just not in the game enough at all, and it feels like everything about him is rushed. All the symbiote stuff was rushed. When you got the symbiote invasion going on, like, it felt like the city just wasn't reacting at all. And, especially compared to the Devil's Breath crisis in the first game, the city was just going nuts that whole time. You can tell it was like an apocalypse on the streets. But like with Spider-Man 2, it felt like just, everything was still normal, but there were symbiotes running around killing everyone still. And, it just wasn't like, everyone was still like driving to work and stuff. It's not like anyone's routine had changed. And it just felt completely wrong. That wasn't my only problem with the story, though. Another huge problem is Anti-Venom. Now, you may be thinking, like, the Anti-Venom suit rocks, like, that's how you defeat Venom in the end and stuff. And, there are cool parts to the Anti-Venom, but, like, especially the moment you get it. The moment you get the Anti-Venom is pretty awesome. But there's also just such huge problems with it. Like, okay, so, the whole point of the symbiote arc with Peter when he had the black suit is that's a moment of weakness for him. Like, that's when he's, like, in crisis and he's like, alright, I need power, I need to be just selfish and take everything for myself. And that moment works because it's limited, but the second you give Peter Anti-Venom back after that, it messes with the symbiote arc, because now all of that doesn't feel special anymore, because he just gets that power back anyway, and he didn't have to sacrifice anything. He didn't have, like, initially he had to sacrifice by taking off the symbiote so that way he could be with his loved ones and not be a dick to them and actually save his own, like, morality. But, then he just gets all that stuff back, so he didn't end up sacrificing any of it. He gets all his friends and the power. And it's like, he might as well not have taken the symbiote off in the first place, because the Anti-Venom is almost the same thing, except it apparently doesn't have weaknesses. It's just a really bad story decision to give him another symbiote. And also, when you're fighting Venom and, like, all the other bosses in the end of the game, and you have the Anti-Venom suit, it just makes it feel weaker, because, like, you're gonna win. You literally have Venom's weakness, and you have the sound grenades and stuff you could throw. Like, it it doesn't feel like the anti-Ock suit, because the anti-Ock suit was like kind of a counter to Doc Ock, but Peter had no chance before. Whereas against Venom, like, Anti-Venom literally, like, is creating weaknesses for him. And it's like a direct counter to his abilities. And, you know, you just don't feel like the underdog like you really should feel as the red-suited Spider-Man against Venom. You should feel like weaker than him, and because of Anti-Venom, you don't. And so I really don't like what they did with Anti-Venom because of that. Another thing I didn't like about the story was the ending. The ending was really weak. Like, in the first game, you had Doc Ock fighting Peter, and, you know, he reveals that he knew his identity the whole time, and Aunt May goes down, but you stop Devil's Breath. And then you learn that Miles has powers. That was amazing. But with the second game, like, it feels so predictable. The only thing that happens at the end of Spider-Man 2 is they defeat Venom, and Harry gets put into a coma, but he's not dead, and then Norman gets pissed off. That's pretty much the only thing that goes wrong, and then you have a little post-credit scene with Doc Ock, but it's so predictable, and it's like, you know, it just felt like there were no surprises, and it felt like a very lackluster ending. And then Peter just, like, starts going on a break from being Spider-Man, which is fair, but, like, that didn't feel like a big story implication moment like Aunt May dying. You know he's gonna be Spider-Man in a year again anyway. And I just felt like the ending of the story was really rushed and just terrible. The entire third act was just really rough. I would say that before that, though, the first two acts of the story were amazing. It's just that because of the mistakes the third act makes, like giving Peter Anti-Venom, it makes the middle of the story even feel worse. Because, like, it's like, yeah, he's taking off the symbiote, but he's just going to get another one back, so it doesn't really matter as much as it could have, or as it seemed to matter in the moment when you didn't know what was coming next. And the final problem with my story in this game is the lack of downtime. So, in the first game, you were going to the lab where you worked at with Otto, and you were going to Feast, and you sometimes went to your apartment or MJ's apartment, and just all these places, and you were visiting those places constantly, and you were also playing as MJ sometimes, and you'd be, like, at the auction house or Grand Central Terminal, and there was actual, like, slow moments where you were swinging or punching something. But in Spider-Man 2, though, like, the MJ missions get turned into, like, these bum rushes where you're basically just doing combat just like you would as Spider-Man, but you're MJ. And that kind of defeats the purpose of it. And even then, when you're playing as Peter, there's, like, far fewer visits to Harry's EMF laboratory than there were of Otto's. There's no more Feast to go to. You don't go to his apartment or anything. Like, the only places you do go to are Coney Island and I forget where else. There was like one other place that you went to a little bit later in the game, but, like, you know, there were very few places that you went to in Spider-Man 2, and it felt like the story was just constantly, like, swing to the next objective and punching stuff. Oh, I remember now. It was when you had the Harry flashback and you went to the high school. That was the only other place you went. But, like, other than that, though, you went to Peter's house as well, but very briefly for, like, 2 cutscenes. And, I mean, the point is just that there's no more downtime in this game. You're just swinging to the next mission and punching stuff, and, you know, you get burned out on that, because in the first game you had just so many quiet moments, and in here, the game feels way faster paced, just too fast for its own good, and it makes it all feel rushed. And I really did hate that. So those were my problems with the story. Next, I want to get into problems with the open world. So there were a ton of cut features in this game, such as changing time of day, changing weather, replaying bases, New Game Plus, replaying missions, and just, you know, the crime variety in general. There were so many less crimes in this game compared to Spider-Man 1. Like, the only crimes you would do that would repeat constantly was just putting out fires, opening bus doors, groups of enemies, and, like, stopping one type of car and maybe bringing someone to the hospital. And I'm gonna, you know, there were, like, 6 crimes that would repeat, and then, you know, those were, like, the only unique things that you would do. And in the first game, there were so many more things. You had jetpack enemies, you had diffusing bombs, you had bombs you had to throw up in the air and web. You had way better car chases that you actually had to go to every guy and hit them instead of just getting to the car. And you also had 4 different type of cars to take down and multiple animations for stopping each. So like the car chases were beyond better. There was so much more variety. You had guys in trunks that were kidnapped. You had car crashes, exploding Humvees, hostages, sniper groups, enemies that would run away, sable outposts on the street, police shootouts, probably more. Like, there were so many crimes in the first game, I can't even list them all. And in Spider-Man 2, I could list them all in like 3 seconds. And it just makes the open world feel so weak. Oh, also, the crimes were shorter. You would get to a crime, and enemies would, like, not call for backup like they would in the first game. And you could get to a crime and finish it in literally 15 seconds, especially if, like, Miles or Yuri was there to help you. So, the open world just felt so lackluster because you had no extra features like replaying bases or changing time of day, and all the crimes just would repeat constantly and be so short. And it just made the open world feel so bad because of it. And that was something about the first game that was legitimately amazing. You know, I would go on there like once a month and just, you know, for a couple hours, just swing around, fight crimes, not see the same ones every 3 seconds, replay bases. You know, there was stuff to do. But in Spider-Man 2, there's really nothing to do once you beat the game other than maybe replaying a Mysterium. And come to think of it, you could replay like the Taskmaster challenges in the first game as well. And you had more bases that were unlocked in the DLC. So there were just like an unlimited number of stuff to do in Spider-Man. You know, it never got old. Some other things I didn't like about Spider-Man 2 are like the details in general. Just there were so many like small details that it felt like they messed up on. Like if you would play as Miles and you'd be in the middle of combat and then you go invisible, you couldn't return to stealth. The enemies would all just still be after you. But in Miles Morales, you could go back to stealth anytime you wanted. Or like if you land from swinging and you just land down in front of a civilian, and then they're gonna like fall over. And in Spider-Man 2, they don't do that. And also the civilians in the first game would like sometimes pull out a gun on you and actually be like an undercover Fisk agent. That's gone. Re-listening to the JJ podcast is gone in the menus, and they always get cut off, so you almost never get to hear them. The social feed's gone, the character bios are gone. If you do a web strike takedown and it goes in slow motion, it like cuts off early and it doesn't have that epic animation it did in the first game. There, you know, it just feels like all the details were really skimped out on in this game. Another thing I don't like, I'm gonna start getting into stuff about the combat now. I still have to talk about combat swinging in boss fights, alright? So combat in this game, for one thing, I don't like the gadgets, okay? I know I said in my video about Spider-Man 2 they should nerf the gadgets. I didn't mean by this much. You know, the gadget, I also said they should be able to make the gadgets superchargeable for a focus bar, so the gadgets would still be powerful. In this game, the gadgets don't do really much at all. They collect enemies together, jump them in the air. You can do like a little blast move that damages some of them. Or you could do a ricochet web, which is just like, would do half of what a web bomb would do. And you know, you just have that, and you know, in the first game you had impact weapon, web bombs, trip mines, electric web, suspension matrix, the little seismic blast thing that would blast enemies like 1,000 feet away. There were so many awesome abilities, and also suit mods and you know, suit powers. Those are also gone in Spider-Man 2. So you can't customize like having different abilities. I mean, there were a few things that it would like give you 2 options, but like one would always be better, and so you're not really changing them. In the first game, you had so many different suit mods, and they would be able to like, you'd be able to customize them. And for example, you could have like the slowdown time when you dodge, and you do more damage when you dodge, and you do more damage when you have more than 100 health. And if you combined all 3 of those, you'd be doing max damage and just able to put out as many hits as you want. Or you could have it so you took like less damage from melee attacks and less damage from gunfire and less damage from explosives, so you had like a max defensive suit. There were so many different builds you could do, and those varieties all gone now because there's no more suit mods. And the fact that suit powers are gone too also sucks, because you just have one suit power the whole time. It's the like Venom Rage, or Symbiote Rage, or Miles's Mega Venom Blast. And I guess for Miles, only having one suit power made sense, but for Peter, he definitely still should have had more. In terms of Symbiote, like, I feel like the animations were really good, but in terms of actual gameplay, it didn't really change much. You had a different super move and 4 different like L1 attacks, and that was pretty much all the symbiote did. It didn't make you stronger, it just gave you slightly stronger variants of attacks you already had. And it didn't really feel like you lost much power when you lost the symbiote, or you gained much when you got it. It just feels like the gameplay's the same. And another quick tangent about combat. When you're like have 40 health and you get hit in this game, it just straight up kills you. And that's pretty messed up, because in the first game you had like plot armor. Like if you got 40 health and you got hit, you would like survive on 1 HP, and the game would give you a little bit of leeway. And that felt so awesome, because it's like in universe, like, yeah, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, he's not gonna die easily randomly out of nowhere, but in this game he does. And I really do miss that feature, just being able to survive hits on 1 health and feel like you're barely surviving a really tough fight. But Spider-Man 2 doesn't have that. But there are, everything I just mentioned about the combat are problems, but the big thing about the combat in this game is it feels like the enemies are just too on your ass all the time. Like, they're hitting you constantly, and you're just constantly having to dodge their attacks, and it feels like excessive to the point where all you're doing is dodging enemies, and maybe you have time to press the square button and do a combo, but you don't have time to like get creative anymore, like uppercut an enemy, web him up, and then yank him down. That was an awesome combo in the first game, and it feels like you never have time to do stuff like that because the enemies are constantly assaulting you too fast in this game, and you don't have the perfect dodge slowdown time feature anymore, which also did help with that. And in terms of those special moves, like you had the 4 symbiote abilities, or the 4 iron armor abilities, and those were problematic as well, because those recharged so fast, and it felt like almost like you didn't need to play the combat normally, because you can kind of just dodge around and punch a little, and then those things would constantly be ready and you could just throw them out. And I felt like that definitely did make things too easy. Despite the fact that the enemies would be more difficult, it just felt like you had less space to get creative. It was definitely an issue. So my main issue with the combat in this game is just that you're always on the defensive, and you don't really have much time to get creative and like get into that flow state of like dodging an attack and like doing a combo like you could in the first game. A few more nitpicks about the combat are just like, they nerfed the leap off move, where you would leap off an enemy and like point them in a different direction. That move and the air throw are both slower. I don't know why they did that. And also, if you're doing a swing kick, it like doesn't track the enemies very well. Like, so you could like, in the first game you could like leap off an enemy and then swing kick them in a different direction, and that was a really like fluid thing. And it's almost impossible to pull off in this game because the swing kick doesn't track them more often than not, or it'll track another enemy. And some moves, like if you do like throwing an object, sometimes you'll be unable to dodge during that, and that wasn't a problem at all in the first game, and that that can lead to some unfair hits, which is really annoying. And one time I even did a perfect dodge and I got hit during it. Like, I did a flip and I got hit by an enemy while I was in the middle of the perfect dodge. And that's just like, that's definitely a glitch, but that's definitely like an unacceptable kind of event that would never even, you would never even fathom that in the first game. So now I want to talk about boss fights. So as I said earlier, my problem with the combat A big one is that you have those 4 special moves and you can kind of just cycle through them a lot, and that's a huge problem with boss fights because, you know, it feels like you're hitting them with those most of the time instead of being able to do anything else. And, you know, most of the bosses just come down to parrying and throwing out all your special moves. And because of that, they all tend to feel the exact same. Like, the Sandman fight at the beginning of the game was amazing, but every fight after that, like Wraith, Lizard, Peter, Mr. Negative, Venom, Scream, all those fights come down to the same thing, which is just parrying their attacks, maybe dodging a bit, and throwing out all your special moves. And, you know, in the first game, all the bosses were different. You know, you had the aerial battle with Electro and Vulture. You had to use the environment on Rhino and avoid Scorpion's blasts and web them up. And you had to, like, bring down the ceiling on Shocker, or like, you had Fisk, where he would have backup come in. And, you know, Tombstone had that too, but his fight felt different because it wasn't at the beginning of the game. But I'm just saying, like, in the first game, all the fights, you fought them differently. But all the bosses in this game, you know, their attacks are different, you have to learn their attacks, but the process of fighting them feels the exact same, and they, you know, because of the 4 phases, they all end up feeling really samey, and I actually think they end up being worse because of that. Now, the one last thing I want to get into about this game is the swinging. So, Spider-Man 2's swinging is super fast, which rocks. You know, there's those new moves, there's the web wings, and the corner tether, and the loop-de-loop, and the slingshot, and the super slingshot. And you could, like, go through these wind tunnels or up air vents and stuff with the web wings. You know, there's the L1 triangle and L1 X moves. You could do it to just, like, fly really forward really fast and then up, like you could Miles Morales with his Venom. And those were cool. All the new swing abilities are awesome. I don't have problems with those. The problem I have with the swing mainly is control. You know, you can start going super fast in the game, but it becomes impossible to control, to the point where, you know, if you do attain max speed, you're gonna lose it within 10 seconds inevitably, because you know, you just have to play so, like, constant stress in order to maintain that kind of speed, and it's just not viable. You know, the first game swing, you felt totally in control and totally relaxed. In Spider-Man 2, it feels like you're constantly chasing that like high feeling of having a lot of speed. And, you know, you're like constantly briefly getting it, and then, you know, at least this happens to me, is as soon as you get that speed, you know, you do like 2 swings and then you feel like you're moving slow again. Or you do a slingshot and then you like crash into a pole or something, and then you just get, you know, face palmed against a wall or the street or wherever, and you just lose it all, and it feels horrible. I think the way they should have handled faster swing in this game is basically having it so that way you would be able to maintain that speed easier, because it's just too hard to keep the speed, you know? And, I mean, yeah, another thing about the combat is it feels like the swing itself kind of takes a backseat. Like, there's so many new moves to the point where the swing itself becomes something you're rarely ever doing, if that makes sense. Like, you're doing slingshots and web wings and all this other stuff, and it feels like, you know, in the first game you get into this flow where you're just doing swings like every 2 seconds, and it felt great. And here it's like you could, you know, you could do a swing, but then it'll launch you up in the air, and there'll be a, you know, a wind vent, and it'll be like, you know, it'll be really appealing to go and do that. And then, you know, you'll want to like land and do a slingshot and just other stuff. I feel like there's like these big super moves when it comes to swinging, like the slingshot and the air vents and the wind tunnels and stuff, and you just end up doing all of those because they're faster than regular swinging. and just it feels like regular swing kind of gets drowned out in that, and I definitely didn't like that. On top of that, like, the swing itself, like when you get near the ground, it feels like the swinging isn't lifting you as much as it did in the first game, and it becomes very hard to like swing without staying on the ground, if that makes any sense. And yeah, I mean, in terms of speed, again, like in the first game you would slowly like kind of gain momentum. In this game it feels like you kind of have to just do one of those super swing moves, and then you kind of have to bust ass and just pay a ton of attention in order to try and keep your speed, but inevitably you are going to lose it. And I find myself getting really annoyed with the swinging in this game more, instead of just straight up having fun, because instead of just straight up swinging around having a good time, I'm doing the super moves and getting a lot of speed and trying to keep it, and it usually doesn't work out. Like, even in those videos you'd see that are like pro swinging of Spider-Man 2, like even in those you would see like they would get a ton of speed and then they would have to play very carefully to lose it, and it would be, it's just impractical to, like, you can tell they choreograph all their moves. It's impractical to just adapt and maintain high speed. And one more thing I forgot to mention is that, in this game, when you have a crime pop up, this is a small thing, but I think it's a really, like, telling of it's a pretty representative of the whole game, is that when you have a crime pop up, it just appears, and that's it. In the first game, you had, like, the police radio that you would listen to, and there were actually, like, they'd be like
attention all units, active robbery of an armored vehicle. Officers needed in Little Italy.
Drug deal going on in the street nearby, a report of terrorists assaulting, a building or something. Like, they would actually have police radio on. In the first game, it's just a little sound effect. I feel like that's pretty representative of the whole game. It just felt like the first game had so much care gone into it, and in the second game here, it feels like they kind of lazed out and they didn't try nearly as hard, and it really shows. So if I had to give this game a score, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. The story is still really freaking powerful, really great during the first two-thirds, and then it gets kind of bland during the last bit. The boss fights are still really fun, though they're all pretty samey. The combat's still fun, though for a lot of reasons it's not as good as the first. And, the swinging as well with the speed is really fun, just not like it was in the first game. I don't think it matched that. As well as the open world just generally being a lot of cut content and not nearly as well developed. So, yeah, if I had to give this game a score, like I said, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. And if you want to know how I feel about the first game, I'd probably give both that and Miles Morales a 10 out of 10. Just because, they did everything right with very minuscule flaws. In this game, the flaws are just so huge that, unfortunately, I have to say that this is my least favorite of the three. And I'm really disappointed in Insomniac. Sad to say. But, when I play this game, it just does not feel nearly as powerful of an experience, or, just as good of a time as the first game. And I hope that they can do better with Wolverine or their next Spider-Man game, because this was, there was just so much missed potential here with what they could have done with the symbiote. And, if you saw my last video with the symbiote ideas, there were just so many things the combat could have done better. I will say they actually did do one of those things. I said that you should have an 8-hit combo, and there's actually like a 6-hit combo you can do in this game if you use a web strike and do the little follow-up, but I don't know. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the game overall. Let me know what you think. This has been a pretty long commentary, so I'm going to close this thing off right now. I might do a review of the first game at this point, honestly, just because, I love to talk about how much better it is more. But, yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you can understand my opinions, even if you don't agree with them. And I'll see you next time. Peace out.